Have you ever wondered how cruising has changed over the years? Today, we're going to go into our time machine and go back 50 years to see what it was like to go on a cruise ship in the 1970s. Up next. Hey everyone, it's Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com. Cruising has changed a lot over the years, but comparing a cruise today to what it was like 50 years ago is truly incredible to think about. Royal Caribbean began cruising in 1970 with Song of Norway, and then they added 2 more ships before halfway through that decade. Those ships began the tradition of what a Royal Caribbean is all about, and today I'm going to be looking back at what it was like to go on a cruise in the 1970s. A lot has changed, and yet some of it hasn't changed, but certainly that core DNA, that feel of a cruise, especially a Royal Caribbean cruise, is still very much there. Recently I ran across a pamphlet that was distributed to passengers that were going on a cruise on the Song of Norway in the early to mid 1970s. There was no date listed, so I'm not exactly sure which particular sailing it was, but it references 3 ships in the fleet, so it was printed no earlier than 1972 when Sun Viking was added to the fleet. The pamphlet is titled Velkommen, A Guide to Cruising the Royal Caribbean, and includes a list of facilities, activities, and services available on Song of Norway. So after looking through this document, I kind of came up with the most interesting and different things that just don't exist on a cruise ship today. Let's start off with number 1. Ships back then had a radio station. We all think of cruise ships as incorporating a great deal of technology, but in the 1970s, radio was still king. Song of Norway had its own radio station where, get this, you could send radiograms, I don't even know what that is, or make ship-to-shore telephone calls. Oh, here it is. A radiogram is a formal written message transmitted by radio. Kind of like an analog email, radiograms use a standardized message format, form, and radio telephone and or radio telegraph transmission procedures. So while today we're trying to figure out if we should get the Royal Caribbean app to use the chat feature, or we should just buy an internet package and then use Facebook Messenger, back then if you wanted to send a message home, you had to go to the radio station in order to do it. Something else that was really unique and different, something that you just wouldn't expect to find today, is that back then you got a souvenir passenger list. It's really hard to imagine that Royal Caribbean would do this today, but back then you would get a list of all the passengers on board. Passenger lists were really a vestige of the truly early days of cruising. I'm talking way before the 1970s. They were provided in order to make introductions among your fellow guests a little bit easier, as well as serve as a souvenir for the voyage. These were given to all passengers aboard liners and cruise ships until somewhere in the 1970s and 1980s. Then it kind of fell out of style and included everyone's name and hometown. Again, something that I just can't imagine they'd be giving away today with privacy concerns and just like, who needs to know that kind of information, right? Can you imagine just walking on board and being able to know everybody's name and where they're from exactly and be able to possibly even track them down later on? Crazy. Now, something that a lot of people still remember about cruises in the 1970s is the midnight buffet. Perhaps the best known but no longer served meal on a cruise ship had to have been the midnight buffet. Before ships had an overwhelming amount of places to eat, the midnight buffet was available every night in the main dining room. You have to remember, in the 1970s, there were no specialty restaurants. There were no cornucopia of dining venues. You really just had the buffet and you had the main dining room, and that was it. If you want something else to eat, you were kind of out of luck. So Song of Norway offered a couple different meals to help kind of fill the gaps. First, there was the Sun Worshippers Lunch, a luncheon served outdoors on the aft of the promenade deck. Hamburgers, sandwiches, and hot dogs were served with no dress code. Afternoon tea was also available, tea and pastries on the Veranda Cafe every afternoon, and the mid-morning bouillon, traditional late-morning pick-me-up at Veranda Cafe on sea days. But of course, there was also the midnight buffet in which you could get, well, a full buffet of food at midnight or somewhere around midnight, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. But it basically helped fill in those gaps between meals for guests who wanted to eat something. They didn't have dedicated venues, but they were able to offer these different meals in between. Now, something that was really interesting, and I think took me back more than anything, was the banquets and parties. So evening entertainment on a cruise ship is still offered today. That has not changed at all. If you go on a Royal Caribbean ship today, you're going to find a lot of parties, musical entertainment. And you know what? In the 1970s, a lot of it was still very much there, but the trends and the things offered have certainly changed. And it's kind of a big deal, some of the entertainment they had on Song of Norway. One of the events they had was Passenger Talent Night, where guests would sing, dance, make magic, or just about anything else they were brave enough to demonstrate to their fellow guests and crew. Obviously, we still have karaoke now, but I can't ever recall seeing in the Cruise Compass something these days for a talent night or somewhere where you could, do something that's not just karaoke, right? Song of Norway also offered Casino Night, which was held on 2-week cruises, and the crew would allow guests to run the games. Yes, you heard that right. They lowered the bets to very low amounts, like 10 cents per bet, and gave passengers a chance to see what it was like to be a blackjack dealer or croupier. I don't even know how they would do this now, never mind the fact that the casino would be losing money in that kind of a situation, which today would just never fly. But the idea that they would just turn over the tables, I mean, I get the idea, right? They want to make it like, oh, look, you can pretend to be a blackjack dealer and you get to be the dealer, right? And, you're having the crew members be the guests there, but I can't just, from a profitability standpoint, this idea just kind of is truly shocking. There was also Masquerade Night, which is just like what it sounds, an old-fashioned costume gala. Prizes were given out for most humorous, most original, and most artistic costume. Guests were encouraged to bring a costume, but the staff could provide necessary materials to build their own on board. And this is kind of a neat one. I wouldn't mind seeing this one return, I'll be honest with you. I think certainly we have this sort of thing on Halloween cruises in which the cruise actually goes over Halloween. But otherwise, I think you'd truly be out of place wearing a costume on a cruise ship for no apparent reason whatsoever. I think that's just a little weird. But for back in the 1970s, you would have been right at home to be able to bring these on board. And I love the idea that you could, certainly be creative with it. And in today's age of cosplay and people really getting into it more than just, putting on a mask, I think there could be some real potential with this idea. Of course, I think the general issue is going to be getting enough people to participate. Now, of course, if we're looking back on things that you did on the cruise ship in the 1970s, there are some things that definitely would never, ever happen today. Because everything else you talked about, you know what? Could still happen. Like, if Royal Caribbean wanted to, they could do these things. I understand why some of these things have fallen out of favor, but this next list are things that you could have done on Song of Norway in the 1970s that you absolutely cannot do anymore, and some of them are truly surprising. Let's start off with the bridge visits were regularly available on sea days. They'd be open times listed in the cruise compass where you could just walk up to the ship's bridge and explore. Now, for safety reasons, especially after 9/11, this whole thing was really nixed. There are still backstage tours that you can do, but those are heavily curated, and you are escorted by security on that one. Another event I cannot recall ever seeing is something called Ladies' Night, and it had 4 rules to them. And yes, this was listed in the pamphlet. Number 1, ladies must ask gentlemen to dance. They must not refuse. Ladies must escort the gentlemen to the dance floor and then return them to their seats. Number 3, ladies must buy gentlemen drinks. And number 4, ladies must light the gentlemen cigarettes. Now, forgetting the whole smoking indoors issue, let's just skip over that part. The rest of this is kind of just like, yeah, okay, it's definitely different, and I'm not sure with a variety of reasons why this would ever happen again. But anyway, that's not going to happen. And something else you might do at an office party today, but not on a cruise ship anymore, is a white elephant auction. At the end of every cruise, Royal Caribbean would hold a white elephant auction sale where you could bring an unwanted goodie onto the main lounge. An auctioneer would then try to sell it to somebody else on board. If they couldn't sell it or beat the price that you listed, it gets returned to you. There were 2 events held on board that used to be staples of a cruise that can never be done today. On sea days, you can engage in a golf driving contest at the aft restaurant deck, which is something some people still remember doing, which is basically, as it sounds, they give you golf balls, you hit the golf balls off the back of the ship into the ocean. Oops. Not even oops. Back then, it'd be like, okay, whatever, you wouldn't think about it. And then perhaps the most crazy thing that they used to let people do that they would absolutely never let people do today is skeet shooting. Yes, they would give guests shotguns, and they would shoot clay pigeons off the back of the ship on sea days right into the ocean. I'm not even talking about the pollution aspect here. How about giving guests who may or may not have been drinking armed weapons to use? What could possibly go wrong? But hey, in the 70s, it was okay. Something else that's also changed a little bit are the gratuities. Now, gratuities were still part of the cruise experience in the 1970s, but just like everything else, if you look back at prices back then, it's going to kind of, I think, blow your mind a little bit. The suggested gratuity rate for a cruise in the 70s were as follows. For the dining room waiter, it would be $1.50 per passenger per day. Busboy, 75 cents per passenger per day. And the cabin steward, $1.50 per passenger per day. Customarily, on a 7-night cruise, gratuities were given on the Friday evening before returning to Miami. On 2-week cruises, it was the custom to extend one half of your gratuity at the midpoint of the cruise and the remainder on your last Friday evening at sea. And how about what you can't bring back? So remember, you're going on a cruise ship. There were rules about what you could bring back to the U.S. and not. And part of the customs process that Royal Caribbean outlined were things you couldn't bring back to the States. That was Cuban cigars, merchandise originating from North Korea, North Vietnam, or Cuba, fruits, vegetables, plants, cutting seeds, or unprocessed plant products, and Haitian animal skins and products made from these skins like rugs, purses, bongo drums, etc. Yeah, the 1970s were a different time, no question about it. And, going on a cruise today has changed a lot, but a lot of it is still very much there. It's kind of interesting when you look back at how much has changed, but also how much is still the same with it. Ships have gotten bigger, there's more venues, but there's still a main dining room, there's still a buffet. And while you may not get a list of every guest that's on board, we've kind of traded that out for Facebook groups and roll calls on the Royal Caribbean blog message boards and a variety of other things. Things have evolved more than they've changed. And honestly, the core DNA is still very much there. But I want to know in the comments below, which of these things from the 1970s that we don't have really today surprised you the most? What would you love to see brought back? Let me know in the comments below. Also, make sure you hit the like button below this video. Make sure you also subscribe to our channel. If you don't, it's free to do so, and YouTube lets you know we have new videos. Make sure you hit that bell icon right next to the subscribe button. That way you get notified of every single video we post here. It's not that many, but just enough that you want to keep track of it. Anyway, thanks for watching. This has been Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and we'll talk again real soon.